Hi, the purpose of this video is to explain the essence of disciple-making movement practices and life. And we're going to trust that you've already gone and watched something short, like a 3 or 4 minute video on DMM. That's like for those who are just wanting to get the quick take. I'm going to apologize in advance because this video is going to be a little bit more thorough, a little bit more in-depth. So if you haven't gone and gotten some coffee or your favorite beverage, just hit pause and go get that and then lean back, because this is going to be probably a little bit more thorough than the typical quick pass-by video. What we're talking about here are the movements that are being observed around the world right now. And researchers are probably disagreeing on how many there are. Some say 120 or 150. Others are maybe advocating that there are more like 300 movements. But give or take a couple of hundred, there aren't that many. And that makes it easy for us to try to evaluate what are they and what seems to be causing them. Now, I just want to say a little quick sidebar. We always have trouble, don't we, with establishing cause and effect. But after we see a lot of common practices in hundreds of these movements, we're beginning to kind of, I guess, conclude that that's worth it. And the very first thing that you see in all these movements is insane evangelism. And, you know, by insane evangelism, we mean that people just are going crazy trying to tell others about their beliefs. And that's really in contrast to the typical church setup that we've all grown up in and observed, in which maybe people come to church and they listen to an academic study and then they leave and don't do anything about it. In these movements, someone or something has convinced them that they need to be out on the street and with their neighbors, with the guy that runs the gas station on the corner, with the person that sells the sandwiches. Everybody they meet and everybody in the movement is constantly looking for a way to set up a conversation that would turn toward the spiritual side of things, or else even just being overt and straightforward. Do you enjoy talking about spiritual things? I'm going to do a study at my house starting Tuesday night. There is just an insane commitment to evangelism. The second thing we observe is a kind of passion. And I don't know how to put this into words other than just call it a passion. We talked about insane evangelism, but it's even just a step further. People who are so passionate about the need to reach the people who haven't heard the gospel, that passion is visible in people's lives to the point that it's different than what you see in the typical church setup. Also, there's another P that we could use if you're keeping track of these bullet points. And the second one is there's often persecution. And I know that we can't try to enact persecution just to see church growth. You know, that's crazy. But more of these movements are happening in places where people are persecuted for their beliefs than otherwise. Now, why is that? We don't know. We wonder if sometimes it's because the persecution is purifying the movement from those who are maybe ambivalent. And so the only people that the passersby view are the ones who are really serious, because obviously a nominal guy is just not going to stick with it if he's going to be thrown in jail or killed for his faith. So the people that you see who are involved in the movement are incredibly believers in it. And that seems to be a characteristic of these movements. But more than anything else that we've said so far is this next P that we could say, and that's prayer. No matter what, every movement that these researchers are studying has always been preceded by this crazy amount, extraordinary amount of prayer. And it's a prayer that goes over the top from anything you've ever seen before. We're talking about people who get up in the morning and pray for 3 hours every morning for growth. They get up in the morning and they refuse to start their day until they've been praying for an hour, that God would allow them to run into someone who doesn't know Jesus that day, and they'd be able to tell their story or God's story. So let's do a quick review. First, there's insane evangelism, and there's this passion, and oftentimes there's persecution, but no matter what, there's prayer. And then the next characteristic we're seeing in these movements is an emphasis on obedience, more than what I think we traditionally have emphasized in the United States of American church. Now, I grew up in the church, and I love the church, so we will never trash the bride of Christ. But it would be possible in the kind of church where many of us grew up to go to church on Sunday morning, and if they have a Sunday evening service for the youth or something, go to that too. Go on Wednesday evening and check these things off. And everybody in the church would look at this person and say, oh my goodness, he or she is the most active Christian I've ever seen. He or she is there every time the doors are open. Because why? We're equating church membership or participation with listening to a study of the academic content. Now, in these movements, it's different. In these movements that we're talking about, that just grow like crazy, being a Christian means obeying the stuff that you hear or learn. It's all hinging on obedience. Now, people who believe in these movements will make a strong case from a verse like Matthew 28, 19 and 20 that points out accurately, I might add, that Jesus did say, not teach them everything I've commanded you. He said, teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. So even Jesus made a big deal about obedience. He said that, how will I know if you love me? If you know what I said. No, that's not what he said. How will I know that you love me? It's whether or not you obey my commands. So Jesus made a big deal about obedience too. And it's no wonder that the people who are in this passionate growth mode in these movements, they are making a big deal about obedience too. The last thing that we see in, I think, nearly all these movements is a bit of a tendency toward allowing people to focus on discovery-based methodology. What do we mean by discovery-based? You know, in the traditional church situations, we have a person who's very smart and very studied, very experienced in the church, lots of background, maybe in a seminary, and that person unfolds for us the meaning of the passage. And we sit there and listen and say, oh my goodness, that's beautiful. That is not happening in these movements that we're talking about. In these movements that we're talking about, what we do is we open up the Bible to a passage, and we all sit around in a circle where pretty much everybody's an equal peer, and we say, what does this passage say for our lives? And we ask questions. And these questions, there's nothing magical about the 4 or 5 or 7 questions, but they tend to be questions like, what do you like about this passage? What was difficult for you? What do we learn about God in these passages? What do we learn about humankind? What do we learn about man? What is in this passage that I ought to apply to my life? What do I need to obey, in other words? And with whom should I share this? And is there anybody I can think of that I should train to be able to do what this passage has taught me to do now? And I'm just going to train this person. Now, let me do a quick sidebar. We in the American church, we're kind of humble people sometimes, and good, that's accurate, and it's godly to be humble. But what that humility has caused us to do sometimes is to think, you know, who am I to help the next guy over in the next seat? I mean, I've not perfected my life yet. How can I help him? In these movements, there's this tendency to say, what we've discovered we need to pass on. And maybe we haven't perfected our life yet, but we'll still pass it on. And more than anything else, we want to help that guy or that girl discover the same thing we have. So we're going to tell them about this passage. We're going to say, look at this verse. This is what I drew from it. Can you see that? Are you interested in this kind of stuff? We're going to talk about this coming Tuesday. You're inviting them to your house to discover the same thing. Another little quick sidebar. What I love about this is that in these movements, because everything is taken from the page, there's very little heresy. Why is that? Because you don't have people who went to some seminary or university that are now explaining what the passage means. And they're quoting some commentary, or they are talking about their trip to the Holy Land, learning this or that from this site. No. What you've got in these movements is people that are just looking at the verse. And they're saying, well, what does this passage say? In fact, you even have other people in the circle who are catching you. And if you start to say, well, now this Mormon guy down the street told me, people in the street, people around the circle will say to you, now where is that in the passage? And because of this question that people are constantly taught to ask, where is that in this passage? It eliminates heresy. Because all you get is what's on the page. And this is so simple that it's just lovable. The fact that you can be a participant in one of these discovery-based studies, even though it's your first time off the street. You can come in as a homeless man. You can be a person that's been addicted to heroin. You can be someone who's shipwrecked her or his life. And when you come into these groups and you just look at this passage, well, you know what I see is that this man said to Jesus such and such. And everybody in the circle says, yeah, that's exactly what it says. You're right. Everybody can participate. It completely disarms the guy or the girl who's been to seminary from going into some soliloquy about a commentary, and it focuses on what Jesus said. And after all, isn't that what we're all about, trying to get back to the Bible? Now you might be asking, okay, so what happens in these movements? What kind of growth are we seeing? Amazing growth. Just a few weeks ago, I caught a guy in Atlanta who's involved in one of these movements. He's working in the country of Indonesia, and I interviewed him for a couple of hours to try to learn everything I could from him. He did these very same things that we're just talking about. And that's what he did. He just focused on simple discovery-based methods using the Bible, and bit by bit he began to see growth. Over the course of 7 or 8 years, this guy has seen some amazing results. Now he has something like 1,700 of these little groups of people that are studying the Bible together. Now you see, to have that kind of growth happen in a traditional church, it just would be impossible. Because you'd have to take time to send somebody to seminary. They'd have to become enough of an expert to come back and unfold and unpack the verses for everybody. Not so with these rapidly growing movements. 1,700 groups over the course of 7 or 8 years, 20,000 people involved. 20,000 people. Hundreds and thousands of baptisms. Now, not everybody involved in these studies has been baptized when they start coming to the study. Not everybody involved in these studies has been baptized when they start commenting on the passage. But people who are involved in these movements say, don't worry as much about that. Why? Because the group will self-correct by asking, where is that in this passage? So you get this tendency that everybody starts being like, what do you call that? Self-feeding, rather than sitting back and waiting. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, and he said, think about it. If you've got the choice between maybe having somebody go and eat up some restaurant food and chew it up really, really well, then come back to you and spit it into your mouth, would you rather have that? Or do you want to open up the plate and have it right in front of you and eat the food yourself? Now, I know that's a gruesome example, but it's really clarifying for me. Once we're self-feeders, we just chomp it up and eat up what's in the Bible. Now we can study ourselves every morning. It opens up the Bible in a way that perhaps we've never done before, because we always thought that in order to have a clear understanding of this passage, we would have to listen to someone who has 7 years of Bible college and seminary. What Jesus has done by making these methods open to us is he's helped us to come up with a way that's simple. And not only simple, it's scalable. It'll grow to 1,700 groups. And not only scalable, but it's sustainable. Those groups can keep multiplying. And multiplication is key to all these movements. They're successful because they're able to multiply. Another example, in our own organization, we have a guy in northern Ghana. He's working with 13 different people groups there, and the majority, maybe as many as 11 of them, are pretty much fully Muslim. So you'd think this growth wouldn't happen very fast because they're all Muslims there. Not so. In July of 2014, this guy had something like 30 believers, and he'd worked there for, 9 years. In July of 2014, he made the transition with his wife to start focusing on these movement-based approaches. And using this approach since 2014, my goodness, every month the stats just keep going up. 650 baptisms last year alone. Now keep in mind, they had worked for 9 years and had 30 believers. Last year alone, 650 baptisms. They're up to almost, I think, 2,000 people attending, and they have hundreds of these groups going on that are just multiplying like crazy. Now maybe you're thinking, okay, that's in Africa or Asia, but what about here in the United States? Same thing is happening here in the United States. Now I guess we just ought to put just a little disclaimer. It has seemed so far that it maybe hasn't happened as often as we would have liked, and we don't know why that is. Is it because people have this pre-existing notion of how things ought to be, so they have a hard time switching gears to think in these what you might call new wineskins? So it's tougher for them to get their arms around, Okay, so you mean there's nobody in the group that has gone to Bible college? And they turn to their peer in the leadership of the church and say, should we permit that? Don't they have to go through our vetting process yet? Well, of course there's a vetting process. The Bible is the thing that vets. And the group reads the Bible and decides, what's the passage say? That seems to be why the Bible was written, so we could do just that. It is sufficient for all the clarifying that we should need. So in this place in northern Ghana, if you were to visit there, you would be able to go to group after group after group, and people would be studying the Bible on their own without having to have the missionary present. And here in the United States, if you were to look for this, you would find it's a little less frequent than what you'd expect. But it is happening. Take, for instance, the fellow that we interviewed from down in Tampa, Florida. He went there having been trained in these methods, and in just a few short weeks, he was able to get several groups going. Now, there is this tendency to think that one guy could start a bunch of groups. And that's kind of what this guy thought. And after getting about 60 of these groups going, he was just tired. As you can imagine, 60 groups that he had started, the guy was tired. It took him a little while to adjust his sails with the help of some great coaching so that he would start realizing, oh, so the groups that I start should be starting other groups. And those groups should be starting other groups. And if you multiply it like that, maybe you only need to find 2 or 4 people that you work with. And those 2 or 4 or 5 people, they help you start other groups. Maybe everybody will always be a member of one group that he or she considers his or her spiritual family. That would be kind of like we think of as a simple church. Maybe he or she keeps going to the Sunday morning church where he or she's always attended. That might be the simple church. And then, in addition to that simple church, the person is always involved in starting maybe one more group. And that group is something that he's involved with for maybe 4 weeks, or maybe she goes there for 6 weeks, enough to get the group going and get them a rhythm, and by then you turn it over. These people who work in these movements, they tend to talk about things like this. You model the behavior for the person that you're trying to train, then you assist that person in that behavior. Then you kind of back off a little more than just assisting, and you're kind of just watching them to see if they do it right. And if they mess it up, you still come in and whisper in their ear, is this what you want to do? So you're still kind of helping them, but you're setting them free just a little bit longer. And then there comes a point like a mother bird that kicks her little baby bird out of the nest, you launch them. And if you've done your job, then on the way down to fall to the ground, that baby bird starts flapping its wings and then can take flight on its own. That's the way the birds do it, and that's the way these trainers do it. Model, assist, watch, launch. Some people say leave. Model, assist, watch, and then leave. You come back and check. It shouldn't suggest that you don't care anymore. You come back and coach, and that coaching is really important, we're finding out. But this acronym, MAWL, really helps us because it helps us understand that we need to take a back seat after the thing gets going. If you do the back seat idea, then these groups can multiply without stopping. And that's what this guy in Tampa did. He was able to start multiplying. And now if you ask him about the people who are involved, it's so crazy. There could be 3,000 people that are all meeting in groups underneath the work that this one guy started. The same thing is happening in other places around the United States as well. Places like in Texas and in Oklahoma and all around. There's a little church north of Indianapolis that has started using this kind of approach within the constructs of a local church. They're trying to work on it being a hybrid system. And they started with a church of, I don't know, 300 or 400, maybe 11 groups. And now those groups have doubled in size and the church has doubled in size. Now they're running 650, they have 29 groups. There's a church I just heard about in the last week. It's out on the northeast side of Kansas City. And in that church, they use their Sunday morning service as a kind of intake place, like you would think of as the lady that works behind the desk at the ER. You go in and the guy that's sitting behind the desk says, what seems to be the problem? Oh, I've got an upset stomach. Well, you don't know yet what's causing that upset stomach, but it's kind of the intake. It's the presenting place. Well, these folks in northeastern Kansas City, they use their Sunday morning service as the intake, but as quickly as possible, they try to get them into groups. And they think that their church happens in the group rather than on Sunday morning. Now, isn't that a wild kind of hybrid format? And people still come on Sunday morning, but they view it as their intake mechanism. And so this will be a question we will have to ask in the United States if we're gonna see growth. But that church has seen it. They've grown from 6 people to 1,100 people in a very short amount of time using this group-oriented approach. Now, you might be asking some questions. Once again, some people say, this will never work at our church because we don't have enough people who know the Bible that well. Just remember that question stops applying once we focus on the simple scriptures and the way that we simply study the Bible for what's on the page. Other people might say, well, I'm afraid of what this will do to the offerings. You know, if we distribute the church to all these house meetings or these small groups, then we're afraid we won't have money to pay off the building. Now, I hear that objection, but I just want to pause for a moment. Do you really want the question of offerings, programs or staff or buildings or budgets to hold back people from discovering Jesus for their very own lives? I don't know if that's very healthy. So my suggestion is, let's just find a way to make this work. I mean, there's got to be a way that we give groups an offering envelope or something. We give them a manila envelope and they have to turn it in every Sunday morning or something. We got to be able to work this out, folks, if we're going to make this work. So let's consider the offering as something we're going to work out as we go. But let's unleash this for the future. So the hybrid idea, the idea that when we open the Bible that things might not go well because those things stop mattering. There's another objection sometimes people raise, and that is, what if I'm shy? You know, we talked about insane evangelism. We talked about everybody being passionate. Well, what if I'm a little more like shy? You know, to me, the jury's still out on this because I used to think this wasn't an excuse, but now I've started observing people. I've started trying to be a little more truer to myself. And I want to admit there are people who are less extroverted. They're more introverted. So how this plays out, I don't know. I know the Bible talks about different gifts, and some people are cut out to be apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers. I know all that stuff. But this is a Bible study after all, and all of us can sit around in a circle and comment on a study, I think, because we're all in small groups. I also have tried this out anecdotally with a cohort of mine. She said, I'm introverted, I'm shy, I don't see how I'll ever be able to do this. And I kind of forced for a while, and finally I said, okay, there's got to be some other way. She happened to visit the jail with a friend of hers, and she found that somehow talking across that video phone or that glass to the inmate on the other side evoked a kind of passion or emotion in her that caused her to want to help the gal that was on the other side of that glass. And before long I was saying, what if you just did one of these discovery-based studies with that person? And her response was, well, I can't do it in a group because they only let us talk to one at a time. And I said, well, what if you just try one-on-one in a discovery-based study and see how it works? Lo and behold, she would come back and she said, it's so natural. I just ask them to read the passage, and they come the next week reading the passage, and then I start asking the questions. What did you think about this passage? What did you learn about God? What's difficult in this passage? I start going through the questions, and even though I'm not this kind of seminary graduate, it's so easy. So in a one-on-one sort of scenario, this friend of mine who says she's kind of introverted, it worked for her. And lo and behold, after a few weeks of this, guess what she did? She started one of these discovery-based studies in her house. She now has 6 people coming to it, and it's going great. Now, you might be saying, well, where do I learn this stuff? And maybe prior till now, you would have had to go somewhere else, like, you know, I don't know, Orlando or something for a week and take a week off work. And it was very expensive, and it was very intense. And also, you really didn't get to practice it between sessions. So you got this big download, and then you were supposed to go back and do it all with nobody there with you to help. Well, now there's a new tool, and it's called Zume. And I know Zume is a little bit weird name, I think. It's because it's from another language. It's from Greek. And the word means leaven. So the idea is that you put a little bit of leaven in the loaf, and the ancient person who made the bread by hand like that, the leaven made the whole loaf rise and rise and rise. So the idea is that if you get enough of these folks who are like leaven, we can make the church rise anywhere in the world. And this Zume project has first of all been kicked off to the United States audience. That's the only audience it's aimed at right now. And you can get there by going to the website, zumeproject.com. If you go to the website, zumeproject.com, you can watch a little video, much shorter than this one, to help you understand what Zume is. But I happen to have this little Zume guidebook here, and I just wanted to kind of real quickly go through some of the high points. There's a table of contents here. What are you going to learn when you go through Zume? First of all, you're going to learn a new way to learn. There are no talking heads like this one in Zume videos. They're all 5 minutes or less. I guess there's one video that's longer than 5 minutes, and it is a video of one of these discovery-based studies in real life action, showing what they're like, so you can get a sense of the real thing. And these are real people. I happen to be at the actual videoing of the real study, and I know these are real people, and they said, should we work out a script or something? Should we try to, talk about some exciting thing that we did 4 weeks ago? And we said to these folks, no, make it real. Do whatever you would do in this particular study. And they did. It's a real deal. And you get to watch that, and that one's an hour long. All the rest of them are 5 minutes or less. And they're kind of interesting. They move fast, a lot of screen activity, and I think you'll find them a little more engaging. You won't have to go get a beverage because it's very fast-paced. The second thing I think you'll learn is the idea of working with a group. We here in the United States have become very individualized. We drive our little cars into our garages. We press the button to lower the garage door if we've got one. We press that before we ever get out of our cars, because heaven forbid that we should get wet walking in, to our houses from our car. We're very individualized, and we want to be safe and everything. The garage door is going to close, so nobody's going to get me. And all those things I understand. There are good reasons for all that. But in other places in the world, they're still very communal. And there's something to be said for that camaraderie. Well, today's generation is looking for it again. They're trying to find it in Starbucks and all the other places where they get together with friends. This Zume study will help you get together with friends. And that's part of the magic of this, is the accountability you get. This obedience idea is greatly aided when there's accountability built in. You'll learn that in Zume as well. You'll take about maybe 9 sessions to get what you need in order to get started. There are 10 sessions, but you might not need the 10th session to just get started. It's more of an advanced session to help you track things after the movement gets going. So the first 9 sessions are really all you'll need. Each session will last about 2 hours if you take into consideration watching the 5-minute videos, responding to questions and answers afterward. They're all in the book and on the screens, and then doing the activities you're supposed to do. You won't be able to take your Facebook here and be working on Facebook in the back of the room, because everybody's in a circle and we're all involved. And we're practicing what we learn. In fact, when you get to the one on prayer walking, you actually go out and prayer walk in the community. When you get to the one on writing your story about how you relate to Jesus, you actually write it and practice it with people. When you get to the one that tells God's story, how can you explain who God is in 3 minutes? You actually practice telling that story. So everything is discovery-based, but then practiced and also held accountable. People are going to ask you, who are you going to tell this to this coming week? And the next week when you come back, they've got that written down. And your circle says, how'd it go with Sylvia? How'd it go with Fred? And you're actually held accountable. Now, I know that might seem weird, but remember, the emphasis on these movements is on obedience. So one of the things we learn in Zume is obedience. You get away from the old wineskin of sitting there yawning, during church. And a lot of people just won't do it anymore. They just don't want to go to church because they sit there and yawn. It's like just listening, taking it in, and then you don't do anything about it. In Zume, you learn what's important and critical, and then you go do it. Then you come back the next week and tell how it worked. And if it takes some tweaking, people in your circle will help you get it. You will learn how to study the Bible for your very own self. And you start doing that, and you're held accountable to it. So you will become a disciple worth multiplying. That's part of the magic of these movements. You don't want to keep multiplying a bunch of people that are kind of broken. You want to become, deep inside, genuinely the real deal, an authentic Christian with a walk that's exciting. And then when you multiply, what are you going to produce? Mirror images of yourself. And if you're broken, you're still going to produce mirror images of yourself. So we want you to get authentic and get genuine. And some people have never prayed for an hour before. So in Zume, you learn some really unique ideas. There's this thing called a prayer wheel. It's 5-minute segments. And segment by segment, suddenly the segments go really quickly because you start understanding prayer through this study. Just a week ago, I happened to be overseas with a group, and I was sharing this very idea, and one of the guys said, okay, I'll try this. He texted me the next morning. He is already in a different airport, but he texted me back saying, oh my goodness, you were right. I used my iPhone and I set it on a 5-minute timer. Every single time I found it annoying that I had to quit after 5 minutes. I got done with an hour and shook my head and said, he was right. An hour's not enough when I learned to pray like this. Everything you experience in this course will be like that. You'll learn to be able to tell your story, to tell God's story. You'll make a list of all the people in your life who are important to you. Some of them might be a disciple already. Some of them might be a follower of some kind. Some of them might know nothing about Jesus. The course helps you figure out how to help each kind of person. And when you approach life like this, you no longer feel disingenuous. Like, am I making friends with this person just so I can evangelize them? Have you ever felt that before? With this approach, you make friends with everybody because you want to help everybody go one notch higher. It's kind of an economy of sorts. You're helping the strong disciple get a notch higher. You're helping the follower follow a little closer. And you're helping the person that's never heard of Jesus to find out about him. Everybody is important because after all, we're so passionate about what we believe, we want to make a difference. By the time you get to the 6th and 7th session, you are actually learning how to facilitate these Discovery Bible Studies. Some people call them DBS. They're in 3 different parts, and you learn a very simple format on how to do that because they're in 3 parts. Some people call them 3/3 groups. What I can tell you is that they're not like your traditional Bible study. I won't name any typical Bible study you might pick up at your local Bible bookstore. I'll just say that many of those Bible studies teach content. And you might even fill out a fill-in-the-blank thing to make sure you get the content. Zume and all of these movements teach obedience and hold you accountable to that. You'll learn a completely different style of what it means to be a Christian. And you know what? I really think that Zume has captured the essence of how to help us become a movement. You'll learn how to do the Lord's Supper in your small groups. You'll learn how to baptize people in your small groups. All this prayer, everybody you meet, you'll want to start praying for them. It doesn't matter if it's the person bringing you the food at your breakfast, maybe when you went out to eat with a friend, or whether it's the guy across the street. You'll pray for people in a new way because you've connected with Jesus. And you'll always be thinking about this special cycle of model, assist, watch, and then launch. And throughout the 9 sessions, you'll acquire that passion that you've kind of observed in certain other people, and you've always kind of wished that you had it. And maybe when you went to a church camp once or to a special conference and you were real involved, you kind of felt the tingling and the tinge of it. Zume will help you live it. And as a result, your small group or your church will grow like never before. Now, I just want to make sure that you understand that this won't happen overnight in your church. That's why I'm suggesting maybe you need to start with a pilot project. If you take this tape, this video in to your staff at your church or to your elders, they might look at it and they might say, oh my goodness, we're not ready for this. Let's schedule this for 2 years from now. But if you just start living like this, it's almost like, I hate to say it, I'm going to look both ways here and make sure everybody understands. It's almost like you're being a terrorist, only in a positive kind of way. Now, I don't mean terrorist in the way that the people do horrible things. That would be horrible. But you're redeeming the word. What does a terrorist do? A terrorist kind of begins operating on the edges of life and little by little starts trying to make a difference and doesn't wait for some government to make a decision. You can call it working underground. You can say you're kind of a secret agent that's becoming more public. You can say that you're a believer. A genuine, authentic, on-fire believer is what you are. And so you just start the study. You don't need somebody's permission to start a Bible study. You're welcome to talk to your church about it and let them know what you're going to do. But no matter what, make it a pilot project. And little by little, start affecting others. And I got a feeling that once people see this at work, they just might realize this is good for all of us. And like one of these hybrid churches, they might make it formally what they decide to do as a church. One last thing I want to say. Not every group succeeds. I was just telling a friend of mine yesterday, half of the groups that I'm trying to launch right now, on odds as best I can tell, half of them are failing. And I just heard yesterday from another author about this stuff who said 9 out of 10 fail, typically. Don't feel bad if this takes you a while to get the hang of this. Don't give up. Just keep on churning. Keep on trying. After all, 2,000 years have passed, and we've been about this work of being a Christian, and we're still working on it. And there are still 7,000 or so unreached peoples. We've got to find a way to crack the code of this, and it's going to take a lot of valiant, vigorous people who will not give up, and I hope you're one of those. If you have questions, the first thing to do is go to zumeproject.com, watch the entry video, sign up. You'll probably need 4 people to sign up, and just try it. Be that redeemed form of a terrorist and start trying to do this. Show it to somebody that you love. Don't hesitate to come and ask me or our friends here at Team Expansion. We are one of several folks who are trying to make this movement stuff work. I'm going to tell you, the possibilities are outlandish. One trainer, in fact, the fellow that's been our lead trainer here at Team Expansion, he was working on a training over in, I won't even say the country, Southeast Asia, Asia. There was a guy that was just kind of like doodling during some of the sessions. In fact, our trainer told us he didn't really even notice him very much. But in a month or so after the session was over, he got an email from this guy that was just kind of an also-ran, just doodler. He got an email from him, said, okay, I'm putting into practice everything you've taught me so far. What do I do next? And our trainer thought that was a little bit weird. He wrote him back and said, what do you mean you're putting him in practice? He said, well, come and see. Dozens of groups were started in this guy's backyard, so to speak. And this trainer began to invest more and more time in helping this guy because he saw this guy was gold. He was really implementing. And those are the people you want to invest in. By the time they took an official study of this guy's work, I don't remember if it was 7 or 8 years. I don't remember if it's 3 years. I don't remember the exact time length, 3, 7, 8 years, something like that. By the time somebody from the, whatever, University of Chicago went there and did a refined, reliable, ethnographic study of this movement, there were 27 generations of churches that were established that involved 1.7 million people who had all come about from this one guy and his wife and the handful of believers with whom he started. The possibilities are endless. And so we're going to pray that you, those who are watching this video, would first of all forgive us that it's been this long. But secondly, put this stuff into practice. Go to zumeproject.com and start implementing today. Our trainers tell us you'll know whether or not to invest in someone by whether or not they start implementing. Is that going to be you? Thank you so much for taking time to watch. It means a lot. God bless and have a great day.